Hi, it's my pleasure to be here. All right, I'm speaking on Node and Express, primarily Express. So welcome to Getting Started with Node and Express. I'm the author of Programming JavaScript Applications. It's an O'Reilly book available for pre-order right now, early release. You can get the digital edition, download it, and you'll get automatic updates whenever we update it. I'm currently on the Adobe Creative Cloud team. Right now, all of our Adobe apps like Photoshop use the Adobe Creative Cloud, and we're building this on top of Node. So, what is Node? Well, Node is just JavaScript on the server, basically, and in robots. It's just breaking JavaScript out of the browser. It's built on the V8 engine, which means it's really fast because V8 has been highly optimized in the Chrome browser. It's evented, which means that it runs in a single event loop. And when it receives events, you can hook onto those events and respond to them. Very similar to the way that you can do so in the browser, listening for quick events and things like that. So you should be fairly familiar with the way that Node works, just because of your previous experience with JavaScript. It's also asynchronous by default, and that's really important because most server-side frameworks have a lot of blocking operations. Like when you try to read a file, the thread just sits there. The thread just sits there waiting for that file to be read. With the asynchronous, what happens is it passes off that file read operation, and then it signals when it's done. So in the meantime, your app can keep on processing things and keep on accepting connections in the meantime. And that allows it to be a lot faster than most other frameworks on the server side. In fact, we've seen exponential increases in performance porting things from things like Ruby on Rails to Node. It has first-class networking, which basically means that that networking is built into Node, and it's a core feature of Node. So we've got like the HTTP module and the HTTPS module, and they're part of the core Node framework, and they're really well supported. It has a Streams API baked in, which means that all of your network connections can be streaming connections. You can treat them as flowing streams, buffering little pieces at a time instead of grabbing the entire thing at once in a big chunk, which means that you can stream part of your connection to another service, and it can stream that back to the client. It can do some transformation and stream it back to the client, or it just kind of keeps flowing through the system instead of buffering and then chunking it out. So it can be more responsive. It has a vibrant developer community. There are thousands and thousands of Node developers, tens of thousands, and there's thousands of modules in the Node ecosystem, and it's growing very quickly. It has a really simple module format. In order to use a module, you just do var some name equals require, and then put the name of the module in there. And to export a module, you just do module.exports equals, and then whatever you want to export. And you can export an object or a function or a simple value like a string or a number. It doesn't matter. It has a really good package management system. NPM, it's not really an acronym, so it's not right to capitalize it all. But NPM it's kind of a central package registry, where you can access all of the Node packages that have been registered, and there are quite a few, and I encourage you to explore it. If you just Google Node NPM, you should be able to find the NPM website pretty easily, and the full registry you can just browse through, where you can look at packages by popularity, and so on. So to get started, you should go to nodejs.org and click the green Install button. Alternatively, you can use NVM, which is the Node Version Manager. And the advantage of NVM is that you can install multiple versions of Node at the same time and easily switch between them. And I do this frequently so that I can check out the compatibility of the programs I'm writing with the future versions of Node that are coming out, or past versions of Node that people might be using. So to create your first project, just make a directory and then change into that directory. As you can see in the example here, we're calling it My First Project, but you can call it anything you want. And to initialize your project, you can just do npm init, and then it'll guide you through the different options. And you can get help on those options with the npm help JSON. And to install Express, just type npm install --save express, and that'll save into your package.json file that you just created with npm init. This is where all of your dependencies are stored. It just puts a little dependency block in there called dependencies, and it shows the version that you want to use. So this will install Express and save the version that you want to use. This is the version that you know works. And here is a good reference application. If you want to go to nodebootstrap.com, it'll take you to a GitHub repository that has a sample Node app kind of all laid out for you, and you can explore that. Organizing files is pretty straightforward, but it's a good idea to have kind of an idea of what everybody else are commonly using. So let's go through that a little bit. Main file is usually stored in the root. This is the file that launches when you require your module from another module. This is the file that will be registered. And you can register you can change that file name and use any other file name, but you need to go into your package.json and create a main listing in there with a file name. So supporting files, these usually go in lib, so for library. Static files, files that are just like static HTML images and so on, CSS, usually go in public. Views and templates usually go in a folder called views. Command line utilities, these are generally things that you just run on the command line that will perform little jobs for you that are not directly related to running the app. So this might be like configuration setup or launching or stopping supporting services such as Redis and so on. You can just put those in .bin. Tests usually go in test or spec. Depends. People who write Jasmine tests usually put them in spec. Most of the other testing libraries encourage you to put them in test. Configuration, I just create a directory called config. It's a very common convention. Documentation in doc. Examples in examples. Performance tests in benchmarks. So if you want to see how fast your app is, write some tests and put them in benchmarks. And then if you need any native C or C++, you can put those source files in source. And there's a good example that uses many of these folders in the NPM repository itself. There's going to be one more folder that's created automatically by Node. It's called Node Modules. Well, it's created by NPM actually, and it's managed by NPM. So don't edit the modules that get stuffed into there. You can delete them and replace them. You can replace them by running npm install, and it'll go through your package.json, look at all your dependencies, and install them all for you. Note that if you just do npm install and you don't do -- save, or you don't manually put it in your package.json, then running npm install again after you've deleted Node modules won't recover all of your dependencies. So make sure that your dependencies actually get into package.json. Useful libraries. Express, of course. You don't have to use Express. There's a lot of other frameworks out there that I encourage you to try. In particular, there's one called Percolator that lets you set up hypermedia JSON APIs pretty easily. There's a bunch of others out there that you should take a look at. But Express is the most popular one right now. It's got a lot of users and a great user community, so it's easy to get answers about it. MOUT is kind of like underscore or the array extras in JavaScript. It's basically a collection of functional utilities. It has a lot of them, and it has them more in the format that you would expect to see in the JavaScript specification itself. In fact, it's my belief that most of the utilities in MOUT should be part of the JavaScript specification. So I encourage you to check that out. And it's really modular, so you can use one at a time and just require one, and it'll just require that one, or you can use the entire thing and it'll require all of it. And it's compatible with both Node and the browser. Express resource is just a simple way to create resource-based routing in Express, which basically means if you're familiar with Rails at all, you'll have an endpoint like users, and then you can get and put and delete and things like that. And those routes are kind of automatically wired up for you. Well, Express Resource does something similar. It just makes routing for resource-based APIs a lot easier. So I encourage you to check that out. qconf is a really simple way to get your configuration into your app. What it does is it will read from a config JSON file in your config directory. It'll take all of those keys and values and pull them into your app so that you can do config.get and then the key, and it'll return the value for you. It also pulls in overrides from both the environment and from command line arguments, and you can pass in the qconf function itself, you can pass in overrides inside of your program. Hogan is basically Mustache templates for Express. If you're not familiar with Mustache, it's a really popular way to do templates that don't have a lot of logic in them. It's pretty logicless stuff, and it's one of the more popular templating solutions. And Hogan is just a really easy way to use it with Express. Superagent is kind of a wrapper on top of the HTTP and HTTPS modules that will make it really easy for you to communicate with third-party APIs. I use this all the time for testing. It actually has kind of a cousin library called SuperTest, and I use this all the time to test my API and make sure that my services are responding as they should. Socket.io is basically a library for WebSockets that works both on the Node side and the browser side to help you enable WebSocket communication. And this is really, really valuable if you have any real-time responsiveness in the browser that you want to enable, any kind of real-time messaging or anything like that. Real-time statistics updates, chart updates in the browser, anything like that works great with Socket.io. Q is for promises. If you don't know what promises are, you should check it out right now, well, right after this talk. Basically, it's a really easy way to manage asynchronous communication, both in the browser and in Node. In the browser, there's jQuery promises, which have become really popular. I encourage you to check those out. All of the AJAX methods on jQuery use promises now. They return promises. So that's a really good way to get an introduction if you're familiar with client-side programming. But on the Node side, I use these frequently to aggregate APIs. You can batch them all together using array.map and return promises for all of them. And when all of them come back, you can perform the next operation that depends on all that data. So Q is just a really great way to make all that easy. And on a related note, Async is another popular way to manage asynchronous operations in Node. You should check that out too. I prefer Q for most things, but Async has its place and it's really popular. A lot of people use it. For logging, there's a lot of really great logging libraries out there. But I've been using Bunyan in production, and I really like the way that it works. So you should check that one out. Tape I use for all of my server-side testing. It's a really, really simple CAPS-producing test library written by Substack. I don't know if you're familiar with Substack, but he's written a lot of Node libraries. So you should take a look at his output. He produces a lot of really great stuff. CUID is just a simple replacement for a GUID or something like that. But the idea is that a lot of GUID utilities don't work very well when you start spanning multiple machines and generating tens or hundreds of IDs in the same millisecond. So when you reach web scale with millions of users during peak hours, GUID algorithms, especially the ones based on just random number generation, tend to produce lower quality collision protection. So CUID was written to fix that problem, to do something about that problem. It gives each generating client its own fingerprint, so that collisions between different hosts are a lot less common. And this works really great in the client side too, in the browser. So you can actually create an entire record, including the ID, and then send it to your service without waiting for a callback to say, hey, here's your new ID, because you can just create the ID in the client and then send it. Credential is a library that I wrote in the course of writing Programming JavaScript Applications. I was looking for a good library to recommend for password hashing, and I couldn't find one that just made it dead simple and still had all of the security precautions that you need to make when you're using password logins. So you should definitely check that out. And read the section in my book covering this, because it's really important, if you're going to use password logins, it's really important that you understand the security implications of it. Connect Redis is a super easy way to do session storage with Redis in Node, in Express in particular. So I encourage you to check that out. In Node, there's something that you need to be aware of. All of your connections are going to share memory. So unlike in the browser where you can just do whatever you want with the memory space, and you're never going to have a collision with data between two different users. In Node, that's not the case because you've got a single event loop and a single shared memory space, which means that as new connections come in, they're using the same memory space. So you can't just store some user data in a closure in some module and expect that to be unique to that user, because all of the other connections are also going to be reading and writing to that same memory. So it's important that you keep a few things in mind. Number one, try not to use too many singletons. Singletons are usually an anti-pattern in Node. A singleton is just a single instance of an object, and if you try to get another instance of that, it just returns the same singleton instance. In Node, this is fine for things like configuration that's shared with everybody, or your logging facility that's shared with everybody. But for user data, it's a really bad idea. So try to avoid doing things like that, and you'll be fine. Try to be stateless for the same reason that I just listed. It's important to maintain as little state as possible in the browser. Remember that all of your users are sharing the same memory space. So the more state that you're trying to store, the less reliable your application is going to be because you're going to chew through memory really fast. But if you store state in databases or, as I mentioned before, store your sessions in a database like Redis, then you're not going to have that problem. So let's start configuring your app. Go ahead and type npm install -- save qconf. And then make sure that you create your config directory. And then create a configuration file. It's just a regular JSON file. Just go ahead and pull open your favorite editor and do my app fb timeout or whatever you want to, and you'll be able to see this data. Use environment variables for any application secrets, or if you need to override any settings on the server. And you might need to override settings on the server, for instance, if an endpoint goes down and you need to point at a different endpoint in production. Check in your example secrets into your repository, but don't check in your actual secrets. So keys, passwords, anything like that should not be stored in your application repository. So instead, you check in an example, and then you just copy that example to your actual settings file. And then you open up that settings file and set the real values in there. So if you haven't used environment variables before, in Bash, you can just do export, and then the name of the variable equals, and then the value, and then source that file. Just type source space and the name of the file, and it'll load those environment variables into memory and make them available to your application. And qconf pulls these in automatically. You don't have to do anything special to make that happen. So you'll want to add your settings.env, the real settings, to git ignore if you're using Git, so that they don't get checked into the repository. Then to use qconf, you just need to require it. Make sure it's in your package.json. I assume you install -- save that already. So make sure you require it, and then you'll need to run. It exports a function that you need to run, and that function just reads your configuration file. It reads your environment variables. It reads any arguments you've passed in, and you can pass an object into this configure function, and that will override any of those other settings. So, and that's the order of precedence. So it's the last one takes precedence over the previous ones. And you can check out the qconf documentation to remind yourself of the order of precedence if you need to. So in this case, we're just pulling that myapp.fb timeout variable that we set a few slides back in the config.json file, and then we're going to use that later in the app. Actually, we're not going to use it in this conference, but you can use it. You can do the same thing with, see the S3 key is an example of something you would set in your environment variables, and you get these the same way. So what is Express? As I mentioned before, it's the most popular application framework in Node right now, and we're going to discuss why that is for a minute. It's a web application framework, but it's also a fairly minimal web application framework, so it doesn't make a lot of decisions for you. This is in contrast to things like Ruby on Rails, where a lot of decisions have been made for you, and a lot of it is convention over code. In Express, you really kind of have the power to do whatever you want, which is nice on the one hand, but maybe you want something more on the other. So there are actually frameworks built on top of the Express framework if you want something that does a little bit more. Or you can use things like middleware that's built to work with Express, or a lot of libraries that can easily interoperate with Express. But for most people, Express makes few enough decisions that you can really build the application that you want to build instead of have the application that basically exists and then you modify a little bit. And a lot of people appreciate that freedom. Express uses middleware, connect middleware, and this middleware works by passing continuations. So basically, you do app.use and then create the name of, specify the name of your middleware, create a callback function, and then that callback function takes a request, response, and can call next. And when it calls next, it's saying, I'm done, call the next thing. And those same variables get passed the next thing in the stack. It has a template API, which is just a simple standard interface for working with template engines. So it's compatible with almost every template engine that you can imagine. And if it's not compatible with your favorite one yet, it's really easy to make it compatible. You just write a really thin wrapper around your template engine and expose it to Express. So to create your Express app, you just require Express, and Express exports a function that you call, similar to the way that you just set up your configuration. To create a route, all of the route keywords, all the route methods, they are, I think all of them, most of them, they have method names on the application object that you get from Express. So you can do app.get or app.post and then pass in the path and create a callback function. And that callback function is your route handler. And in that you'll get your request object and your response object, and then you can do what you need to do to respond. In this case, we're just setting the content header to text plain, and it's saying hello world. And this response.end method will automatically send the response to the user and close the connection. It does everything that you need it to do. Right here, the app.listen just tells Express to listen on port 3000. So it's going to accept connections on the default HTTP port and respond. Parameter matching. So Express has this idea of parameters where basically you can create routes that use parameters separated by forward slashes. So just like any other URL path. And you can get at those using the colon notation. So you'll see /, and then some token like name or email or something like that. And then you get at that with the request.parameters. Whatever that token was. So in this case, we can respond. We can say hello and then give the name that was given in the URL and respond back that way. Express also supports regular expression-based routing. So you can do something like this where we've whitelisted a couple of different users. So we'll say hi to our friends, but we won't say hi to the hacker down the street who's trying to break in. Oh, one more thing about this. When you do that and you don't have a named, see here, you have the named parameters. If you're using regular expressions and you don't have named parameters in there, you can still access the parts of that URL using the params and using it as just an array, so you can get the array index instead. So that's how we're accessing Hugh's name in this case. Middleware. As I mentioned before, middleware works by just passing in a function with request, response, next. In this case, we're just adding some data to the request object that we can use later. And you might do this, for instance, to access data for a template. So in this case, we've created this request.foo. And on the next slide, we're trying to use it in our route here, our root route. Right here, we're just doing response.end request.foo. And so we're just echoing back whatever they sent in, or whatever we sent in on our middleware. Error handling is a really important and often overlooked aspect of Node and Express. The most important thing that you should learn about error handling is to let your application crash. Because if you handle an unhandled error and just let it keep running, and you don't know where the error came from, you don't know what might be lingering, you don't know if there's open connections, you don't know if there's memory being chewed through. You just need to let the application crash so it doesn't start doing random wild things that you don't want it to do. And that's okay. It's okay for an application to crash because you can just restart it. And Node applications restart very quickly for the most part, unless you do something really wrong. You can exit on unhandled errors. In this case, we're creating an exit timeout, and we're just using one of those configuration variables to configure how long we're going to wait until it times out. And then we're going to set a timeout and then exit the process after that timeout has been reached. And we can use this exit function wherever there's an unhandled error or exception. So you'll want to add your error handler to the bottom of your middleware stack. So you just create it. The error handling middleware for Express is just like any other middleware, except instead of taking 3 parameters, it takes 4. It takes error, request, response, and next. And you don't have to do anything with request, response, or next if you don't want to. But you still need to specify all of those parameters to let Express know that this is an error middleware. So you'll want to log the error as soon as you get it and respond with a 500 error to tell the user, hey, something's gone wrong, instead of just not responding. And then call that exit method that we just wrote. Now, you could do just that, but then you'll be vulnerable to bad requests. All of the errors in the 400 range, or most of them that I know of anyway, are errors that you don't need to shut down your app on. And they're errors that can be triggered by input from the client. So a mean client might want to purposely malform their inputs so that it'll crash your application in order to try to create a denial of service attack. So there's something that you can do about this. Number one, you can watch the rate of requests and limit those, or block the user who's trying to abuse you, but it's sometimes hard to tell whether the traffic is legitimate or whether it's abuse. So it's not a good idea to just automatically throttle everybody, especially if you've got a client who just happens to send you a ton of traffic. But it is a good idea to not shut down on those types of errors. So you can actually specify a range of errors that you're not going to shut down for. And then just write an if statement. In this case we're saying if persist.indexOf, which means if the error status is in the array that we're specifying, or in a range that we're specifying, you can also use greater than and less than and specify a whole range of errors. Then don't shut the server down. Just log the error and then send an error message to the client to let them know, hey, whatever you're doing, it's not right. So fix your request and try again. And then on all other errors, you can still send your 500 error and shut down the process. So database-backed sessions. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but now you're going to see an example of how to do that in Express. So first, npm install --save connect Redis, and make sure that you've installed Redis. I don't expect you to do all of that and have it done for this webcast, but you can try after. As they mentioned, this is recorded and you can go back later and watch it again. So go ahead and require Express and then create your session store. And in order to do this, you just require connect Redis and then pass in your Express object. And then in order to use the Express sessions, you'll need to have the cookie parser middleware, or something that does what the cookie parser does. And that just gives the Express sessions access to the cookies. Next, you'll want to pass your Redis store into the Express session middleware. So you'll want to do app.use express.session, and then pass in a new store on the store attribute. So in this case, we're doing new session store, and then we're passing in the variables that we've set up in our configuration already. So in this case, it's the host, the port, the session, database number, and then a secret for the cookies. And that's it. Once you've done that, you can use your sessions just like you normally would. And for more on that, you can see there's a section on using sessions on the Getting Started guide on the Express website. Templates. Templates are really easy in Express because they've kind of created this really easy template engine API. So all you need to do is require one of the template engines that's built for Express, and then use app.set views, which is a special thing that tells Express where to find your views. And if you're using the common convention, they're going to be in the /views directory. Turn off the default layout. By default, Express has a layout option. So it'll lay out your template inside the layouts, basically. So it creates some wrapping around your template. You can turn that off. So in this case, we're doing view options, layout, false. Tell Express which engine to use. So you just imported your engine. Now you've got to tell Express, use this engine. So app.set view engine. And then in this case, we're using Hogan to get Mustache templates. And then specify your view extension. So I'm using .html as my view extension and just keeping them in the views directory. And you can use whatever extension you want, but try to use one that's commonly used so it's not confusing for other users. And then make sure that your template processor gets passed into this engine thing here. In this case, Hogan exports the Express API on _Express, so you can use it like that. So here we're responding to all of the root requests by parsing that or processing that template. So in this case, we're taking the request and the response, and we're doing response.render, which is a shortcut that says render this template. And it'll automatically look at those settings that you just set up and render the template from the right location using the right view engine. So you just pass in the name without the extension, and then request.data or whatever your data input is. And then you pass an error callback if you want to handle any errors explicitly here, or you can just leave the error callback off, and it will handle errors using your default error handler. One more note about errors. If you don't specify an error handler at all in Express, it won't use one, and but it also will swallow your errors, so it won't stop your application. So it's really important that you put an error handler at the end of your app.use stack in order to catch all of the unhandled errors. That's about it for the presentation. You can see more at ericleeds.com. Here we go. Do a little Q&A. Can I use a regular expression pattern for middleware? For middleware, as in app.use some regular expression off middleware. So I don't think so, but you can for routes. I'm not sure about the middleware. You might have to investigate that on your own, but I don't know, but I don't think so. Okay. Willem asks, how is your experience with Connect, Formidable, and Stream handling? I don't have experience with Connect Formidable, so I couldn't tell you. So I don't know the answer to that question. Sorry. Okay. Regarding previous question on using Node.js standard libraries rather than Express, I guess there was a previous question that led up to this. I don't know what the question was. Let's see if I...
Hi, Eric. I can read the previous question from Fada for you.
Okay.
Let's see here. She asked, here we are. I've heard from Node experts for most web app needing server connections, you don't need Express. You can just use Node.js, standard libraries, and docs. You don't need the Express library. And that only reason to use Express is for templating and using Express API to a router. Do you find this to be true? What other purposes would we express over the standard Node.js libraries?
Okay, so the answer to that question is pretty simple. Express just makes it easy to use the middleware and the continuation passing. I am not a gigantic fan of middleware and continuation passing because it's really easy to create a mutable state on your objects that you're passing between one middleware and another. And then if you have that mutable state and you rearrange things, it can break your application. And it's sometimes hard to figure out what went wrong because as your objects get mutated going from one middleware to another, it's hard to see exactly what all the dependencies are as far as like the data dependencies and the dependencies on various mutations. And for that reason, there are quite a few people who dislike Express just because they dislike the idea of the continuation passing. However, Express has a lot of really useful middlewares that are not particularly problematic. And in my experience, the middleware stacks don't get very large if you're careful. So, but it can easily be abused. But if you're being careful and you're not abusing the continuation passing model, Express provides a really easy way to get an application up and off the ground really fast. And the API is just, it's really simple to learn and really simple to use. And I'm using it in production on sites that have millions of users per month, and I know a lot of other people are too. So it's a solid piece of software, and I definitely encourage caution when you're using it, but I don't encourage you not to use it. I think that there's plenty of reason to use it just to get the convenient APIs that it provides. And there's more to it than, I think, just providing a router. And there are other router libraries available, yeah, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's the entire Express ecosystem that you're going to be missing out on. Well, not necessarily missing out on. And you can still kind of use the APIs, but it's a lot more convenient if you can just plug in your middleware that's built to be used with Express. So I don't agree that you should avoid Express. I think it's a really useful library. I like it. How does the event loop call all the callback? It seems to me that calling all the callbacks and one using threads. I know that, okay. So I think the question is, how do the callbacks get called? Well, it works the same way that the browser works, essentially. You have a single thread. You can always fork more threads manually, like workers. In fact, there's some simple libraries that help you manage that kind of worker threading if you need to. But I think the question here is really, how does the event loop call your callbacks? Well, it really doesn't. You don't have to do anything special, except if you want to purposely interrupt the event loop and say, okay, I don't want this processed during this round in the loop. I want it processed during the next round in the loop. And then you can do process.nextTick. I think that's being deprecated. So you can use set immediate or set timeout, as I did in the example, and that'll delay whatever processing you're trying to do into the next loop cycle. Other than that, it's kind of managed automatically for you. So it'll watch when the loop turns over. It'll look at things like incoming requests or incoming events that were that happened between the start of the last tick and the start of this new tick. So it'll look at those. It kind of creates a stack of those, and it'll go through that. It'll process each one during the tick and then move on to the next tick. So that's kind of how it works. And you need to be cautious with that, because if you try to do something like calculate Fibonacci or something inside of that single tick, you're going to block the next tick from happening. So you're going to block the new connections from happening. So you want to avoid blocking. So if you're doing any intense processing, you'll want to do that by spawning a worker thread and doing that in the worker thread, or just have a completely separate service that handles it and just send it using JSON, HTTP, or whatever communication method you want to. You can send that work off to another process to handle it, and then just get back to it when it's done using the standard asynchronous conventions that you use everywhere else in Node. Okay. Have you ever accepted a file upload through Express, and have you used Formidable and Connect? I have not used Formidable. I have accepted file uploads, and there is a simple file upload API. I'm not going to go into it here, but you can check it out on the Node website. It's part of the Node API. I'm not aware of a file upload utility in the Express API, but I haven't looked for one. So you might want to check both of those places. And some more stream handling. I've already answered that question a couple of times. Is there such thing as self-contained JavaScript, Node.js, or whatever mini desktop app solution? So yes, there are multiple solutions to run Node apps on the desktop. I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head, but if you Google around a little bit or ask some questions in Node forums, I'm sure you'll be able to find the answer without too much trouble. I know that in particular, there are lots of apps that are using Node to power their applications, including there's a new Photoshop. The new version of Photoshop from Adobe uses Node to produce. Basically, you can create websites or whatever and process your layers and output things using Node. That's pretty cool. Does Node and Express have caching built in, or is there another library to use? So memory caching is really easy to do with Node and Express. You just store the in-memory object, but you can also connect with things like Redis and memcached, and those are really easy. There's lots of libraries available. Express versus Meteor or Famous. Meteor is more of a real-time platform. So if you are primarily using real-time capabilities such as creating a chat application, then you might want to look at Meteor. Meteor is still not quite ready for prime time, I think. They've been in beta for a long time, but you should check it out, see where the progress is on that. I'm pretty sure you should be able to at least play with it and have some fun. I'm not as familiar with Famous. As in a regular expression is in Sinatra. Regular expressions are just a common regular expression, regular expression language. And it's just any JavaScript regular expression should work with the routes. Come from a Rails background. In Express, are routes and controllers one and the same? Express doesn't really have the same concept of controllers as Rails, but you can kind of look at it that way. It doesn't do the auto wiring that Rails does, but yeah, you can actually create a real controller if you want to, just by wiring up your your routes to controller objects, but you don't have to do that. Any resource for getting a Node application on VPS would be helpful. There are lots of VPS providers out there, and their tech support should be able to help you. I can't answer that generally because the different providers have very different systems. So you'll want to do your shopping and find a provider that works for you, and then hopefully they'll be able to help you. Can you give me a good resource on promises and the Q library? So the Q documentation itself is really good. So if you just want to search for the Q library on GitHub, that's a good place to start. There's also a number of promises documents, including the promises A specification that you might want to read. And there's lots of blog posts on the topic. Also in my book, I discuss promises in more depth. So you might want to take a look at that. Okay, this might have to be the last question. Let's see. I've worked through WebBot spiders and screen scrapers, and I have a PHP WebBot that I'd like to convert utilizing Node.js in order to handle JavaScript on more complex sites. How do I go about starting this? Well, I would start with a good request library like the Superagent that I mentioned before. And actually hitting the sites and pulling down data is really, really easy. Handling the JavaScript, I don't know, because I don't know what you're trying to do. So good luck with that. Comparison between Express and Meteor. As I said before, Meteor is more for real-time applications, where Express is more of a, if you want to process a request and return some response, Express is great at that. You can use Express and real-time together using libraries like Socket.io, but they're not an integrated solution like Meteor is. So I might have a little bit more time. Let's see. And I have examples of which corporates use Node. So Yahoo does, eBay does, Adobe does. In fact, there are literally hundreds or thousands of enterprise corporations using Node now. In fact, it's more of a question of which ones are not using Node at this point. It's been very well adopted by corporations for the same reason that it's been well adopted by the user community, and that is that it's really, really fast. So especially enterprises can see significant cost savings by switching to Node. And it's also really really easy to learn and use, especially if you're already familiar with JavaScript. I have more time. All right, I guess we're out of time now.
Thank you so much, Eric. What a fabulous presentation. Everyone seemed to really enjoy it. And if there's anything else you'd like to leave the audience with, please do.
You can learn a lot more about Express and Node. There's going to be more on this in my book, so definitely check that out. And you'll learn a lot more about promises and how to handle asynchronous programming and functional programming, which you'll do a lot of in Node in my book as well. So definitely check out Programming JavaScript Applications. And I believe there's going to be a code for a discount on that right now. So take a look. That's about it.
Thanks you so much, Eric. We just pushed out that code again to you all. So you can save 50% on the early release ebook or 40% on the pre-order print. All right, everyone, that's it for today's webcast. Let's thank Eric for his time and a really great presentation. And as a reminder, we will have this webcast archive up within 48 hours. So thank you all for joining today. We hope to have you with us in the future. And again, thank you, Eric. Have a great morning, afternoon, and evening from wherever you are. Bye-bye.